committees and to a condominium task force. So if we could put that under the other category for future workshop topics.
Yep, well, we can add it on here and we'll do it. And I'd like for the record to add one more late June, early July workshop to bring the board in for the level of service discussion for the budget. So we can start going over the GL lines and determine level of service.
What were the 2 items you had?
I'm sorry, the 2 items were appointing liaisons from CROA to the committees like recreation and dog park and so on. And then the second is the consideration of creating a task force made up of the condominium association's members to advise.
Actually, I really like that. That's something that we talked about. That's the message. Yeah. All right, so we'll put those under agenda for future workshops.
Yeah.
All those with you?
Yep.
All right, so we have the first of Jack, second, Debbie, and agenda.
There's nobody that doesn't vote yes then, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Kevin, hold the microphone a little bit closer. We got updates first. So the interlocal with the county. I know Brian, thank you for jumping in for me. It was yourself, Jackson, and Vaughn. So you guys have updates to share.
On which one?
The county.
Oh, yeah, we, Steve, Brian, and Jackson and myself, we met with the county on the issue of the funding that they were going to offer us. And we made a proposal at a, I think it's a workshop. Yeah, it was at a workshop this month to see if we could ask the county to consider transferring the funds or applying those funds that they were offering to the ball fields and our concession building instead of to the community center. And our reasoning was that we thought that the public use and access provision would also apply to the fields and the concession building, which already exists anyway, will already exist because you have outside usage of that, of those facilities, or you will. So we made that proposal to the county. The deputy county manager was there. Bob Mendez, what's his title, Steve? I don't know.
He's a parks director, essentially.
Parks director. Anyway, we made our proposal to them on that and explained why, and we wanted to pull the public use and access issue away from the community center that we want to build somewhere and apply that public use and access interlocal agreement, the whole agreement we wanted to apply to the fields, which would be in place anyway. The public use and access provision would be satisfied as we felt. And when we presented that to the county accepted that and really liked the idea. So that's what we're going to ask the board to approve. And they were very receptive, thought it was a great idea. They said the only thing they have to do is to get approval from the county commission, which it didn't seem that there was going to be any problems with that. So once the interlocal, and I believe, Steve, you want to discuss how that's going to work, once you get that worked out?
Yeah, so I think 2 points that we want to discuss. They're going back to the county attorneys to discuss how an interlocal agreement would work. Do we need to utilize a governmental entity like the CDD, or can they do it directly with us, with the CROA board? And then the second part of that discussion has always been, what does public purpose look like? So I sent them my first draft and first thoughts of what public purpose should look like for open athletic fields. And it was identified as all of our youth sports, youth and adult sports partnerships would have top priority, meaning all practice and all games would be scheduled first. And then our second priority would be any types of clinics or offshoots of those partnerships, those groups that we work with here in town. And then the third priority was economic impact events to the county. Any event that experience Kissimmee or the county's bringing in that would bring heads and beds into Osceola County as a whole. And the reason why that's important, and we have to consider that, is the funding that they want to utilize to give us will come from park impact fees, and then the second half of that will come from tourism dollars. And tourism dollars have to show a return on their investment by putting heads and beds. We can't drop that down to the lowest priority. I don't think it will work. It has to have a higher priority than what I put as last priority, which would just be anybody in general wanting to rent a field. So most of our usage is going to come from our partnerships and our leagues. And then any other time that we have open that can bring economic impact dollars into the county. And those will probably be over the summer during the day, times when kids are in school, not during our peak times, which are usually between 5 o'clock and 10 o'clock at night, and then Saturday mornings. Those are typically our league times. And leagues in Florida run spring and fall now. I mean, they pretty much run all year. So that's what we sent back to them, and we're just waiting to hear back from them on feedback from those priority listings.
Yeah, I think what we really wanted to do was take that public use and access away from our community building, and that way it's ours. We get to use it the way we want. We don't have to give up space.
Right.
And we can put it where we want. We want to start working on that right away. I mean, I would think as a board we'd want to start having board members actually go and again, like Jack did in the past, go look at some of these other community centers, get some ideas rather than just shooting from the hip. See what they look like, see what they've included in their buildings, maybe get some information on the cost. But I think I'd like to see us get going on that right away too.
Vaughn, can I add one more thing real quick too? I know Jack has a comment, but for our top priority, which is the partnership with the existing leagues, it's important to understand too that those leagues already take residents and non-residents. So that was that public purpose. So it's not, you're not saying only Celebration residents with ID cards can go and use those fields. We could not sustain athletic leagues in this community without taking in registration from outside. We just don't have the numbers.
Yeah, so basically nothing's really changing with the corridor sports. We've just changing our local agreement money to apply it there so we can get our money back. That 2.75 out, is it going to be 2.5?
The 250,000 is available now, and then there's 2.5 that they talked about being available October 1. Now we did ask because when they initially offered that money, it was all coming from park impact fees. Now the mention of tourism dollars is coming into play, so we asked for more, and we got a maybe. We didn't get a no, so maybe is always good. It's better than no. She said maybe.
First off, I'd like to thank the group of four of you that getting this off center. This is a very important thing for us to do. And it's an innovative way of doing this. I congratulate you on whoever came up with that brilliant idea. I would like to consider one thing in a recreation master plan, a category that where you actually recognize downtime on the fields, because I don't want to see an increased usage of the fields or possible usage of the fields, but I mean, that's going to preclude these fields from getting rested and us having to redo these fields every 3 years as a result of the increased usage. So if we can program that in there as well.
Yep. And
I agree with Vaughn as far as getting a group of people to go out there and meet. I thought about that this morning as far as meeting with Danny Bumpus. That, you know, we've talked before what our approximate costs or the value of a $3 million building would be. He's got one that's a good thing for us to take a look at. It doesn't have the plans and activities we would expect to have in our community center. So I would expect you to go visit someplace like Point Siena that has two community centers and see what the layouts of the community centers are, the activities that are folded into them. And I think we ought to get moving on this as quickly as we can.
Do you have a contact with them now? Are you working
This.
we do.
Brian said, yeah.
Yeah. We did a set of minutes, which was in the package, which went to the public, and which is up there. Because one of the things we wanted to start trying to avoid here is having what the heck was really said. So I'd like to highlight a couple things from that.
Can you make that bigger?
No, unfortunately, it's an email, so I can't.
It doesn't get any bigger.
Copy and paste it in a Word and then expose it.
I could.
In the future, you could do that. First off, the county was actually excited about the proposal with the athletic fields. It met with their needs more than a building. We even met with Commissioner Chowdhury at the end and they all agreed that this was an easier, more straightforward thing to get approved, so I think they were happy. They could provide the $250 whenever we wanted. They were interested, they brought it up in putting a technology park at the end of the athletic field in maybe 2019, 2020. They think that they would provide the funding for that. They also talked about the North Village walkways going across to this, and they said they would be interested in funding that down the road. So they clearly said that they had put in for $3 million, all they could give was $2.5 million. So the $250 now, $2.5 million next year, I think that's it. And they clearly said, you know, you're probably going to have to finance your community center yourself. So that's why we wanted to do some minutes here. Traffic study, they said they were going to do a traffic study out by the library. They already knew there was an issue, so we got that one addressed. And one thing we pushed hard on, and they agreed to totally, was that the contract will say we're getting reimbursed. So, you know, if we kick off in June 1, start spending monies, which we have, we get reimbursed for those funds, so we don't have a waiting period. I had personally pushed hard that we need to get the improvement done. Bob had agreed that he was going to work with Steve. I saw you read Bill across the him, because we need to get, everybody agreed we need to get the interlocal done and signed, and in front of the commissioners, the 4th out of the 7 have to vote yay, and then we're off and rolling. So, a majority vote.
I think that's awesome. We definitely have good progress.
I thought they said 4 out of 7.
Four. 4 out of 3.
There are 5.
You have to get 4.
No,
yes.
there's 5 commissioners. I think you need 3 votes. Yeah.
3?
Okay, my error, sorry.
Okay, 3.
Um,
I'm sure you guys, I'm sorry, run this by the Recreation Committee, feedback, or?
No, we haven't. I mean, Recreation Committee hasn't met since I think the end of March. April was their last meeting, so they haven't met since this conversation. But the Recreation Committee is really not tasked with the design of facilities. They're more tasked with the programming aspect of this.
I mean, just as far as the operational part of the program.
Yeah, well, they'll have a huge role to play in the operational part of it. And as Jack talked about, the downtime for maintenance and those types of things. But I mean, when it comes to athletic fields, I worked with multiple high-end. They were the women's U.S. soccer training facility. So, and Todd as our operations manager, and even Yellowstone, we all have a pretty good understanding and knowledge of Bermuda 419 fields and the amount of time and rest that they take for keeping them at really high quality.
I just know we've had issues with these where teams just pick up and come on. And I don't
Yeah,
know.
well, this is going to be a fenced facility, so we have complete control over closing them down. Plus, the fields that we have here at the school are not Bermuda fields. They are a mix of all kinds of stuff. I mean, they have to be stripped and laser leveled every so often. And the school fields just, they've been mowed and weeded and trimmed, but they haven't been capital dollars going into them.
A couple of comments. First of all, with respect to the contract and going through CCD, I think we need to get that answer as quickly as possible. And if in fact it has to run through CCD, we need to make clear that we've already drafted the agreement. They don't need an attorney, in our view, to redraft the agreement. It's a pass-through, and I think we should be very clear with them about that if it requires that. The second thing, just to echo what's been said here, is that the county was very receptive and very eager to do this. I think Vaughn deserves a lot of congratulations. I don't know whether we have to take the victory lap yet, but the reality is that this was a huge shift. It was a great way to get us the funding and then buy the time to do a good job on the community center. And so I agree with what's been said about setting out a task force. You recall that we had a motion that we tabled early on to set up a task force for looking at the community center and getting community input. And there will be a time when I think it's appropriate to come back to that, I hope in the near future. I'd like to see us take advantage of the gap we get, the breathing time we get to do this right now and really think about what our options are. And I think this is what it's giving us, is that opportunity. And the last thing I wanted to say is just that I appreciate that the community gave us the space to work through this. This was a high-pressure situation coming out of the last board. I thought it took a lot of patience on everybody's part to just hold our fire for a little while, let us get focused on what we could do and then move this forward. And I think this is a model of what we should be aiming for as we go into these other projects. So I'm really proud of what we've done here.
I think, Steve, we have to congratulate,
Yeah.
Steve, you did a great job
Yeah.
giving Beth that intro to the
Yeah.
Thank you.
whole situation that we're involved in here and what's going on with the board and the community. So, I mean, you did
Yeah,
a great job.
absolutely.
So that intro really set the stage, I think, and the tone for that whole meeting.
That's perfect. No,
Well, thank you.
And exactly what Jackson was saying, when we sat down, and it was the three of us from the board wanted us to go ahead and sit down and discuss it, we were like, all right, let's give it a try. And you know what, that's how we got to where we are at.
Yeah.
And hopefully we can tie up these fields quickly and then get our focus on the community center and continue growing. Two questions real quick. Did they discuss or change anything when it came to the length of that contract and that agreement? The usage agreement originally for the community center, they said 25 years, so same thing there. And now I know that you mentioned, Steve, the money is capping out at 2.5 from the county, but now Experience Kissimmee is getting involved.
Possible tourism dollars, yes.
Will that possibly increase that 2.5, or are they split it at 2.5?
They were pretty clear up front that the 2.5 was it, and we pushed her a little bit more, and she didn't say no. She said, she did a sigh maybe.
Well, she did say no.
So that's all I'm saying. I don't want to. I think you count on
She
the
said no.
2.75.
She said no.
Bob specifically said
Yeah.
they asked for 2.5
Yeah.
was the cap.
Yeah.
No political person wants to tell you no. Of course, I don't want to win votes, but don't anybody mishear any of what was said. 250 now, 2.5 million later, and then they threw in the technology park and they threw in the walking.
Right. They did say we could come back and ask later.
Oh, no, you can always come back.
But I think the difference, and the reason why I'm saying this over and over again, is because when you start talking about tourism dollars, you talk about increased use of our fields for economic impact events. The old deal was never to use tourism dollars. It was always park impact dollars, which met the needs of the residents. Now we're talking about going above and beyond the needs of Osceola County residents. We're talking about meeting economic impact events. And it could be huge for them to have premier fields in Osceola County that can help offset practice spaces for tournaments at Wide World of Sports, at Austin Tyndall, and whatever is going to happen over at the Margaritaville field. So
I think-
it's worth leaving on the table until you sign the contract, until you sign the agreement.
Can we elaborate on the technology part? Because I have no
It's
idea.
a technology playground, not a technology park. It's an interactive playground where it'll work with your cell phone for apps, and it's different playground providers have different.
Sorry, what kids are supposed to have cell phones at that age?
Every kid in
They're
Celebration
10-year-old
at that age has a cell phone. Watch them walking home from school.
But you're still considering the playground at the far east end of the.
Yeah.
We told them that our project right now did not include the playground.
No.
They said that maybe they would look into funding something in the future.
Okay, so I'm kind of wondering, we have never committed to what we're doing with the land between the dog park and the CDU building.
Right.
And we didn't in this meeting either.
We did not.
They actually raised the question of a technology park or playground. They're excited about doing that in places, and I guess they feel because of our technology foundation here that it would be something that's appropriate. I think our view was we weren't going to say no to any money that they wanted to offer us.
Well, especially since we had planned a possible playground in the future at the end of those fields, and if not next year, but the year after, they want to come back with some more dollars and put in a playground, I think that's amazing.
Do our plans include putting in a hotspot down there at that end of the-
Yes, we do have Wi-Fi hotspot that we're going to put in there. We have one at the dog park, and then we're going to do one down there at that end also.
And I think there was some concern about I think Jack brought it up about the maintenance on those fields, which is a good point. I think we did discuss that at our meeting with the county, that having that artificial field is going to allow us to let the others rest. And when one's in need of repair, we can just focus the teams on that artificial field.
Yeah, and that will.
They very clearly said they're giving us 250 to 2.5 billion in maintenance is our issue.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
If you would like, just to continue the conversation, if you want to skip over to item C, it's discussing more about the left fields, recreation fields and the restrooms. So as this conversation continues, we can go right into that.
Okay. Hopefully it'll be bigger.
Well, I think the only update really we have for that, I don't think there's anything to pop up there, but the update that we had for the athletic fields and the concession is that the plans are being finalized, and this week, I believe, they're going out to RFP for the building, which means you should have some bids to look at for your June meeting and select a contractor, a GC, to build the building. The athletic fields are moving along. It was permitting. It's still in the phase that we're in. We had the mitigation credits that we're purchasing for the wetlands that were identified on the property. But it's just, that's a lengthy process. It always takes a little bit of time. We are trying to do a groundbreaking ceremony in July and start tearing down and clearing out the land and getting the road ready. You'll also see a change order coming in June to put the lift station for the restrooms. And then I don't know what the difference in cost is going to look like, but on the golf course, the Lot D property, we'd like to clear that entire piece out and put some Bahia grass in there now as part of the overall construction. So there's going to be a change order coming for that also.
Can we wait on the Bahia grass until we decide on what the civic center, where it may go, or what's going to happen with that?
Well, the
grass is not going to be put down until November.
if you were to open your facility in the spring of 2019, that is extra parking that you can utilize immediately.
I understand.
And
That grass will take, if you put it in November, you don't have to do it immediately.
Oh, yeah, it would take, you're gonna do all the clearing and construction first, because that area is probably gonna be a staging area for the construction on the other property.
I'm just saying, if we do make a decision,
It would be very end. That's kind of finishing touch stuff that they would do at the very end of this project, probably really late in the year. Yeah. Yeah, but while the bulldozers are out there, you might as well clear the whole thing out. They're gonna have to they clear 3 swales anyways across that property as drainage from the road. So we're just talking about the pieces in between the swales being cleared also.
So we're looking like we're on time with everything, tying all together.
For spring of 2019.
Where do you and
Yeah, I
Bob
think they're
stand
trees.
on
I
the
think they're-
local exchanging stuff? I see you got that.
Ball's in Bob's court right now on putting together, and I think he's essentially taking the old one and removing community center and adding in athletic fields, and then changing the priority usage information that I sent him. And then any, depending on what they find out about CDD involvement, any mention of CDD will have to go away.
It would also take out all the construction information and the liabilities and the timelines for construction, because there is no construction per se. I mean, we're not building.
And
There's-
I just don't want to be at lost in priorities.
No, it's not. It's,
Following up regularly.
yep, I'll follow up with them. If I don't hear back from by tomorrow, I'll get back with them.
Perfect. So wrapping up between interlocal and recreation fields as a whole, are we good on that?
Yes.
will we see the interlocal in any form at their next meeting?
As soon as I get it, I'll forward it to the entire board, so that you'll have an opportunity to look at it.
How do you have an issue, like if they're going through, everyone's going through the ball fields past the dog park, that the dog park isn't accessible, so, I mean, how do you?
So is the question, is it gonna be a issue with the dog park of people trying to get into the dog park? Well, the dog park gates are fully operational, so they're gonna have trouble without their ID card. They won't be able to get in. Other than if a resident lets them in and holds the gate open for them. But the dog park committee is going to be meeting, I think they're meeting first week of June. They're looking at a couple different dates. And they're gonna put together some enforcement policies for the rules. They'll look at the rules again and look at the enforcement policy. And I think that that's really the best we can do is monitor, have the policy in place for enforcement, and just keep an eye on it.
I think that would be a great note to add to that committee and ask, hey, this is what's going to happen between the library being public, then you go to the dog park, and go to CPD.
Right.
And then you have, it's going to be very confusing for county residents.
Well,
Really.
the signs are on the gate that say you have to.
I know, but it is going to,
Sorry.
they're
Well,
going to have challenges.
and
Hopefully,
if
that
we're,
committee can help.
yeah, and if we're thinking it's going to be, it's not going to be part of the interlocal agreement. So it won't be a requirement from the county to have public access at the dog park. They're completely separate projects.
Just want to make sure that we have an appropriate message and plan to
Right.
implement it. All right, going back to the website, real brief, myself, David, Patrick, and JR, as well as Steve, met, we discussed. Patrick came back with
on the
Next
May.
Wednesday.
Yes.
Right. So we're trying to vote on that at a board meeting, or that should, now, that RFP, did that come out in email to everybody? You know?
I don't think that all of the
Okay, good.
responses went to everybody. Just you and Dave as that subcommittee that was appointed by the board to review. I think we asked in the meeting, do you think everyone would be interested? And I think there was a lot.
There was an email that came to everybody with the 3 RFPs. I actually read them. One of them looked like a NEM, one of them looked like a Ford, and one of them looked like a Mercedes-Benz, and I'm curious which one.
Yeah.
For that matter.
Right. Well, I think the answer to that is you budgeted, the CROA board budgeted $15,000 for a website. This one comes in at a little bit over 16 and some change. One of them came at $85,000, so that's for Cadillac.
That first bid, however,
yeah.
is the same company that Patrick actually looked at 2 years back.
It was, yeah.
And the same company is still interested in working with us in
Right.
Celebration. Ultimately, it comes down to that pricing seems to be the clientele that they have, their portfolio. That $85,000 one, works
Mhm.
for things like, I don't know, Nestle.
Kraft
or
and-
Kraft,
right.
The big companies. So it's almost like they give us a price to say, we don't have time for you. Don't pay us. But they have to go ahead and give a bid. That's how we perceived it. At the end of the day, the back end of it is the same between all 3 companies. So with that being said, the rest of it is customization on our part.
And-
So it's not too different.
And what's the expected completion date if we approve this in May?
Ideally, we're looking by the end of the year. We don't want to put too much pressure on, but November Founder's Day is probably what our goal would be. But let's go ahead and keep it on line with that.
And is part of the expectation that we're creating a more user-friendly environment?
It will be not only more user-friendly, but safer as well.
Yeah.
One of the things that we had concern with was our live stream videos not being safe regarded and being available to the general public. And so that was one thing, Jackie mentioned, should not have been the case. Unfortunately, it was, and that's one method. Second is to go ahead and ensure all the documents are on there and easy to access, and kind of get rid of any confusion when it comes to finding everything. The website is great for when it came out, but as with anything, we grow and we move on, and we need to make sure it meets all right.
And we need to, as they're building it, it needs to be intuitive. It needs to be considered from how a resident would go about looking for documents, not how management would, because we're used to the day-to-day business side of it. But if you're a Joe Schmo resident and you want to go in there and find stuff, you should be able to find it much easier. So that will be something that they'll consider.
Right. And the content is still something that we, as a community, are responsible for. It's the format, it's the pages, it's the IT side of it, which ties into the back end, which allows Patrick and the team to better fit the website to the community and the residents. So they will go ahead and they'll give us they'll do the first revision for the first draft of the website. They'll come back, we'll share it with the entire board. Everybody will play around with it, see, what concerns, see if we can all use it and it's friendly for all of us. And we'll get 1 round of revisions, and then they'll roll into the final products.
The residents on these change their attendance passwords.
The front porch should still remain the same.
That's part of the conversation is having that transition to the front porch to remain the same. Yeah, this is a different experience than what happened in 2015. It's not a cookie cutter website. This is going to be custom, and that's part of their payment is to get that transition. Yeah.
So we'll have, if we could, maybe have that emailed out to the entire board so everybody can review it before the next week.
You have the RFP?
Yeah.
Okay.
For the, I think, IDGB.
Well, we're sending out the entire packet on Thursday this
Thursday.
week? Okay. Do you want the RFP
It's
before
up to everybody
Thursday?
if you guys want.
PB in the packet is fine for me.
It is in the
Separately.
packet.
Yeah, it's fine.
Okay.
Time for
Get that board packet.
Mm-hmm. But remember, you're getting the condensed packet
Yeah, we're
now
getting
with the
the
links
PDF.
and all that stuff.
the new and improved version.
Right.
We're getting the one that you're doing, the new.
Yes,
Super.
cutting out all the printing of that paper.
Good,
That's what I said.
good.
Closure on the website. Follow up on the executive session with council. Steve, I'll take your direction on this. I'm not sure
Well, I don't know, but is there anything that you all feel you need to discuss at this meeting? I'm not sure what you want to accomplish right now.
I don't think there's anything that we really need to bring up. I think any questions we had were answered at that session.
Right.
Yeah, I just want to say that I'd like to keep open the option that we may look for additional counsel to represent us if it appears that there is a conflict between our position and CROA's position. You recall we discussed that with Tom, and he was open to that if we felt it was necessary. I don't know that it's necessary at this very moment. It's hard to know where we are with all the various pieces of the downtown litigation. But I'd like to at least keep that alive, that we recognize that there might come a time when we want to have independent counsel representing CROA, that our position may not be fully aligned with CROA or another entity that Tom and his firm is representing.
And to his credit, Tom was open.
He was, very,
And
yeah.
as council advisor, that's the decision. So that's nice to hear.
Yeah, and there were a couple different topics legal topics that were discussed. That was one of them, but I do want to make sure on record that CROA is not in any type of legal situation with Town Center condos at this time. CROA is in arbitration for aesthetics, for things that need to be done from an aesthetic standpoint. But that was one of the topics. The other topic was the roofing issues and the construction defect from Drake. And we have engaged Angus and Terry, and Paul Terry is working on this as we speak. I think he's putting
Yes.
together the 535.
Could we see a copy of
558,
the
sorry.
retainer agreement? Could you send, is that going to be in our board packet?
Yes, it will.
Okay.
Absolutely. I was also going to say, we've got 2 action items in there to ratify the decisions that were made at the executive in light of transparency for the community.
Right, okay. And I don't know if the agreement with council is something that's privileged. I suspect it is, but if it's something that can only come to the board members, I still want to see it. If it can be released to the community in your view and based on precedent, then by all means, let's release it.
Okay.
Wrapping up on updates. Very good. Next item we have on here is Artisan Park and Evergreen Activities. Now this agenda was created by David, so I'm going to use everybody's guidance here. Just turn it over to me. All right, beautiful.
Is 200 big enough, Jackson, or do I need to go bigger than 200?
No, it's perfect.
Okay, good.
This is why you need to put them in words, you need to blow them up.
Yeah.
Okay. Artisan Park had sent us and I went to an approach, like when I did the minutes and a couple things here, where I think if we have the meeting or something, you can do a quick Word document, email, put stuff in the package, and it's like easier. They had 4 requests. Steve and I met about 3 times. Kathy Gums was part of the process for a meeting, and we went through. I think it actually worked pretty well, but I think sometimes it's just better to do things below the radar, get them documented, and move on. From the perspective, the first question was financial statement preparation and review. Really, there were just some questions. Before we even had our first meeting, 99% of them were dealt with. I don't think there's really an issue here for the board. It was more just getting clarity between the 2 parties. So there's really nothing. This is working. There's nothing really for the board to do or to be involved with, in my opinion. Management of reserve funds. There's 3 reserve funds. There's an Artisan Park Reserve Fund, a contingency reserve fund, and an amenity enhancement reserve fund. What was requested was that management of those reserve funds go from CCMC over to Evergreen. Steve agreed that made sense, discussed it with CCMC, and CCMC also agreed it made sense. They wanted a board motion to do it. We, as the CROA board, have to approve disbursement, so we're not losing control. It's really just taking bureaucracy out of the process. We get monthly financials and everything. Don, you have a question?
What does manage the reserve funds mean? If we still have approval authority for disbursements, what's the manage part mean?
Really, it's, okay.
I mean, you can't.
They're putting together the monthly financials, presenting them for the town, rather than having to go to CCMC, then having, it takes a layer of bureaucracy out of the process.
Okay.
Well,
so
let me add also, right now the money is sitting in a bank that CCMC is managing. It's going to be taken and given to Evergreen to put into a bank for them to manage.
That's pretty much the only difference?
I think that their statements and the information that they need are all part of the monthly provisions that are given. But I don't know that a statement is due every month. I think that was one of the things that we talked about. Go ahead.
But you were doing bank recs, and you were getting the bank
Right.
recs, so I mean, you're getting control.
Right.
I'm Rand Saylor, a member of the Artisan Park Committee. I think if we substitute the word administer for manage, we get a more accurate result. All that they will do literally exactly the same steps as CCMC. They hold the reserve funds and they disperse from them only upon board, committee approval and CROA board approval. We are switching the people who administer the account. The procedures will stay identical in terms of protecting CROA. There's no discretion being given to Evergreen that wasn't given to CCMC.
If you look up there, it says administer, and motion says administer. It does not say manage anywhere. It says administer.
Well, it says manage the reserve funds, right in that,
Not in
in the second paragraph,
Yeah, but
the
not in the
third
motion.
line.
Not in the motion.
I just wonder what that word, fourth line, I'm sorry. CCMC and I both agree that it's logical and efficient for Evergreen to manage the reserve funds. I didn't know what manage the reserve funds meant.
Administer. I'm happy to change that word.
Well, I didn't.
It means
but-
nothing.
As long as, because then the next line said approval through CROA, so that's all I was wondering about.
Okay.
If there was going to be expenditures without CROA approval, that was fine.
It's, no, and we clearly said.
In the
CROA
next
still
line.
has approval, so.
Okay.
Does it make sense to get statement copies or no?
I'm sorry, I can't hear.
Does it make sense to get statement copies from the bank just as a?
You know, I think in part, and if I'm speaking out of turn here, I think part of what we're trying to do is just make this more efficient. That there was just so much layer, adding layer on top of layer, it slowed things down. It just made it less efficient and effective. I don't think we're losing any oversight capability here.
I actually think getting statement copies.
You get the financials
We
from
get-
them.
We get the financials, which include the reconciliation, we're approving the expenditures. I mean, there's no risk here.
So I have a question, and this might help, and I apologize if it's ignorant. I might need you to come back up. How did we get to this decision? Why is this the way it operates? How do we not have this type of a situation when it comes to other service areas or what have you?
I can answer that question for you. It's the supplemental documents. They were written specifically to allow Artisan Park to have a committee that approves the expenses for the exclusive common areas of Artisan Park. There is not another condo in Celebration or another service area in Celebration that operates with exclusive common areas.
And
So
this
that,
is the absolute best way. It doesn't make
Well-
sense for being another association,
Right.
an official.
well, they certainly have that option, but it requires a vote, a large vote, and I don't remember the exact number. Well, I think they're not only that, but of Artisan Park residents also, so it would require both votes.
I think this is a better solution in that, and Steve actually made his comments underneath, Evergreen and Artisan Park aligned and better incented to do a good job, because it is their funds, they're administering it, and everything is there, so it's working. We, as CROA, have the ultimate oversight responsibility, but we're getting monthly financials, we're approving the disbursements from the funds and everything, we lose nothing out of this, but CCMC, and we'll talk about one other thing here later, I mean, a lot of this is getting a more efficient process versus just making work be done twice.
Oh, I see that, and I agree with you. I guess, bigger picture,
I was gonna say, regarding the change of a charter thing, I don't think, Tom Sundberg and put that in their charter where they have a threshold or a relationship. So they would have to get something like 75%.
75%, I believe, is the number,
To
yes.
vote in favor of it, whereas we could do a quorum and threshold on our side.
Right.
So it's almost an impossible thing.
Rand, you might as well just have a seat up here. Join the table.
One of the things that was hardest for us to grasp last year when we were going through this is Artisan Park. There is a designated service area, but we have no corporate existence or status. We are like if CROA were a company, We're not a subsidiary, we're a division. We have, and that's why the supplemental documents, as Steve said, are unique, because even though we don't exist as an entity, we have the right to, a limited right, subject to your oversight, to run ourselves.
Right.
Believe me, it's confusing, and CROA still maintains an existing level of not only of current oversight, but for example, anytime CCMC saw something in the financials or in the initial trial balances or anything, they are entitled to ask for bank statements, backup, conversations with accountants from Evergreen and so forth. CROA has the ability to watch us inch by inch, second by second, given the fact that we now have a qualified management company. I'll go back to the point of streamlining. When and if you guys want to take a look, dive deep, you have full authority to do that at any time. If you're saying, I wonder if they're really doing the job they're supposed to. So that's always there. And CCMC, I don't mean to put words in Steve's mouth, but they, believe me, they will, if they say, we think something is either not being done or done incorrectly, they will tell you. And at which point, you guys have the full investigative authority without any need to, you don't need any more formal action or resolutions or anything.
I think it's,
Confusion real quick, is the CROA does not have this, I'm willing to call it micromanagement. I feel as though what CROA is required to do the way it's written is micromanage your committee, your company, Evergreen, so on and so forth. Something that we don't do with any other service area, or that we do, but it's just, it's a very different operation. Now, CROA does own an asset that is exclusive use to Artisan, and that's the clubhouse.
And the field.
Micromanage comment at all.
We always,
Well, I will go back to what
Yeah.
Brian said earlier and what was so pleasant about sitting down with Brian and Steve. Brian, we started to wax eloquent on this is the same. Brian said, simple, not too many steps, make it work. And as the result, you will see on almost all of, we do need a resolution just to shift the reserve funds. But in terms of the financials, in terms of maintenance, in terms of the other things, what's happening now is, notwithstanding the weird supplemental document relationship that is created, our conversations were entirely practical and resulted in practical solutions. So the the issue of control is there, but the good news from our point of view is CROA is not taking the attitude that the right of control requires micromanagement anymore.
I think
I
we're,
don't
I think,
want that in there at all, and that's
Well,
what I'm trying to
the
say.
the problem is, we would, to diminish your potential powers, we'd literally have to change some of the governing documents, and that is just like the idea of us trying to incorporate or becoming, those are massive undertakings. And Brian correctly said at the beginning, if we don't, CROA board, have to take formal action and revise documents and create amendments, let's not. And that's what I think we came up with. And that, from our point of view, we couldn't be happier with the way this is handled, because it is entirely practical. And I'll go back to my mantra from last year. At the same time, it does not subject CROA to greater risk. It does not subject CROA or other Celebration residents to cost. All the things we're doing are practical, but they don't diminish your ability to protect yourselves and Celebration. It's a win-win.
well, I think you had to work, the Artisan,
I just want to hear what you say after this. I just
Okay.
one final comment, just because of the risk. And as long as this is all squared away and everything is good, then I'm perfectly fine. That clubhouse is owned by the entire Celebration community, the entire membership. God forbid something happens there. What risk is there when it comes to liability, insurance, for the entire community as a whole? God forbid something happens in that pool, whatever the case is that you're gonna get sued anyway.
It's no different
right,
than any other.
you're tied to
The
it.
fact that we own that building.
Well, I think the best way to look at that is, last year, that was a big part of the conversation between the CROA board and the Artisan committee, and it was written in the resolution that was passed, and it was written in the contract that Evergreen has to manage those common areas. So the artisan committee will argue that Evergreen is, and I would agree with them, they're a better fit at this point in time for managing that, because they, in their monthly payment that they're paying them, have some expertise that is on site there above and beyond what was being paid before to CROA. So it's, right now it is a better fit. It makes sense as long as it's like any other building we have in Celebration. As long as the systems are in place to maintain them, then you're in a position where you're okay. I would say the best way for you all to look at this, though, is that you have a fiduciary responsibility for the assets within Celebration, within the community. And just the last point here is that you're getting all of the assessments from the Artisan Park residents. They're all coming to CROA. CCMC is then taking and dispersing the operating expenses back to them. All we're doing now is taking, instead of holding on to the reserves, now we're giving them everything back. We're saying, here's your reserves too, and that's going back to them also.
Brian had a point, and then I have.
Well, okay. Let me go through the last two items, and then we'll take the rest of it.
Sorry, no,
I think it's important to see the whole package here, because issuance of access card, because it kind of goes to what you're talking about here. We actually talked about that for 3 different meetings, came up with 9 different solutions, and ultimately, Patrick came up with something that works well for everybody, which was Artisan Park residents have to come to town hall first, and we've now got the technology and everything to the point where town hall can do everything it needs to do all of its education. Then the person takes that card and goes to Artisan Park. Artisan Park can do its education and flip a switch. What I had required was a solution that was, if it wasn't going to be efficient and something that could be implemented at Island Village or somewhere else in an equally efficient manner, it wasn't going to get brought forward to this board. Actually, I think it was a success of the process that we ended up with something that we could implement anywhere and everybody liked. And so that was a win. On the inspections, which goes to your questions you were talking about here, which was the 4th item, Todd has already conducted an inspection. It went well. Evergreen is conducting inspections, providing those reports. Evergreen's doing more inspections than we would have done. We're getting copies of those reports. That process is working well. So what we've actually got here is a process where we think Artisan Park is getting better service, but we got someone who's dedicated to them only in this manner, and we found ways to take the bureaucracy out. And a lot of it, the advantage of having a CROA person there was, okay, we got to get through this nonsense, and we got to get it to the board meeting, which got us to this one motion, and then we think we have something that works, and we can follow up on this once a year when we go through our budgeting process to say, what have we learned, anything that needs to be tinkered with. That was the fun.
And one more point to that too, not only do they have a inspection schedule, but then if you look at their meeting minutes from their committees, you see them taking action on the items that were identified in the inspection schedule. So the work's getting done.
As an Artisan Park resident, for full disclosure, it is obvious that Evergreen has an active presence in Artisan, and that presence is working. There are rough edges, there are things still to be worked on, and there are challenges out there. But I think that it's a good model for the Island Village of how you can have self-governance within the broader context of CROA and in all of our assets and properties. The fact that we as a board will ultimately have the ability to address expenditures and to review them, I think gives us plenty of protections, and I appreciate what the committee, I appreciate what Brian did and what the members of the Artisan Park Committee did. I think that this is something that's pretty manageable, and I appreciate that we can do that without giving away any protections at all, at least from my standpoint.
And just want to make something clear, though. The conversations that are being had with Island Village and Mattamy at this point, unless something has changed, and I don't believe it has because I haven't heard anything different, those amenities there will be CROA amenities that every member of CROA can go and use. So it does, I don't think that the conversations have taken a turn of them self-managing and having exclusive common elements.
Right. I mean, to be clear, they haven't said that, but I don't think we should be naive enough to believe that it's
Be
set in
prepared
stone.
in case,
Yeah,
right.
that's all.
I just,
3 short comments. One, on the absolute issue of risk, the asset is covered under, and the decisions with respect to, is covered by the CROA policy or policies that cover all aspects of the town. And the decisions as to coverage are made essentially, and can be made, and should be made by CROA. We pay the insurance, but you guys decide the coverage. So you have that coverage. Secondly, along with the inspections, one thing we found, because it creates value over time, we were always going out and getting this handyman to do this and that company to do that. Evergreen has a person, well, they have a bunch of them, but one of them is, we have a guy who's been in approximately 8 to 10 hours a week. Every time he's there, he knows more about the facility and knows what to look for, and he's incredibly meticulous and good. So none of our small stuff is being farmed out, and that's a huge follow-up on the maintenance. And finally, with respect, and I'll go to the access cards just for a moment, I was prepared to be Horatio at the bridge and fight this one to the death until Steve made I made the point, we need to meet and greet our residents. And Steve said, yes, that's true, but they are Celebration residents first, and that's why we now have the two-stage. The town gets to touch them and inform them, and then we get to touch them and inform them. Again, perfect solution, and to be honest, and I never thought I'd admit this, it puts the priorities in the right place. So again, Steve and Brian said, what are you trying to accomplish? And I said, well, we need contact. And then Steve said, does it matter when your contact comes? Then we were done. So the process is excellent.
No, I'm comfortable with that. That was my one question, which is liability sense.
Well, just following up on that, I don't know if it's appropriate for this agenda or maybe another one, but Rand, if you said that you pay the insurance because the clubhouse, the pool, and the field across is generally resident only, unless you have a guest that you want to bring in on your own and you're paying insurance. Or is CROA paying insurance as well? Are we paying twice for that?
No, I don't believe, no, it's, they have part of their operating budget to reimburse you for the insurance expenses.
Okay, I just want to make sure that
I think that's what Susan
it's
knows that.
the residents in Celebration outside Artisan were paying double, paying it also.
No, CJC has the policies, they hold the policies. And then Artisan Park just pays their proportionate share.
Because it's shared,
for-
75-25. It's, that way you're not paying the full cost of it.
Okay.
Okay.
I
Lastly,
know you're
though,
crying.
I would like us, if everybody can agree, to vote on the motion, because then we could address this issue, move forward.
Would you like to make the motion?
I move that we make the motion as it is laid out right there.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Can we vote on it here?
You can, yeah.
Yes.
It was a documented agenda item, so you can vote on it, and we'll have it. We'll just have to put some minutes together for it.
Any opposed?
I did, on that question, I did have a resident call me and say, can you vote at workshops? And I think the misconception has been that you couldn't for years. It's not against state law. So it goes back to, I think, some of Jackson's points that he's made early on. You don't want to get into a habit of voting on big community items at 9:30 in the morning on a Monday. You probably want those to wait until your board meetings, but something like this, it's been talked about at public meetings, been talked about at regular board meetings, so I don't see this being an issue, but it's going to be more of a perception thing if you start doing regular big action items at your workshops.
If we, moving forward, if we expect to make a motion, can we possibly put a note in there? I know it's on here, but just to get the community up to speed that it may happen on things that are, whether it's time sensitive, everything will happen in public, it will happen recorded, it will
Well, let me,
happen posted.
personal privilege.
Yeah.
I just want to let the board know that apparently the streaming is not working again. And I've been notified, the reason I was looking, I got several emails from people trying to get on to see the board package. I know the tech is tough, and I know that it's beyond the control sometimes of us, but this is now the second time, I think, that it's happened, maybe more. And there's got to be a resolution to this. I don't know if it's we don't have the right pieces of equipment or we don't have, I don't know what it is. But I would request that management do whatever it takes to assure before we start the meeting that we're streaming. It's an obligation that I think we've got to the community, and we need to keep it.
I didn't realize this, I just saw that. I didn't realize it.
Is it being recorded?
It is being recorded. It'll be posted, and I'll find out why the
Yeah.
live streaming's gone down again.
Yeah, that's definitely a priority.
And if it's an expense, we'll bring it back to you for approval if it requires that, but I'll find out why we don't have the equipment that's operational at this time.
And it's my understanding that whatever, and JR can correct me if I'm wrong, there's some sort of a streaming box.
There is.
The box has to be rebooted, and apparently the reboot takes hours. I don't know, maybe you need to do a test stream, before we start a meeting, long enough in advance that if there's a problem, you can get it rebooted.
The stream started as scheduled.
It did.
Just cut out. That's what we've been trying to fix, and neither one of us can figure it out.
Wow.
And maybe there's better technology than the box, I don't know, but we'll look into it and see. I mean, even if it costs more money to do it, we'll try and figure out what that is. Can we take
our
a
cell
quick
phones out and
2-minute
do
break?
Facebook Live.
Yeah.
If that's okay with the board,
Yeah.
2 minutes?
So we wrapped up on our artisan conversation, replacement reserves. Brian?
Okay,
As well?
under replacement reserves, we've got a separate memo here. One of the things I did as I became the new treasurer was start to figure out, okay, what the heck do we have where? In a couple of the presentations that I've made, like the last board meeting workshop, I talked about we have the different reserve funds. And we have the replacement reserve fund, and for perfect clarity, replacement reserve fund is where you go through and if you need to replace a roof, if you need to fix parks and stuff like that of existing stuff in place. We have engineering studies that are done every 3 years. The last one was done in 2016, next one will be 2019. So, to me, we live in Florida, it's hot, these things get used, the replacement reserves are critical. In what I have shown those as segregated, restricted funds, and then we have the other reserve funds, which can be commingled. We have
Right.
flexibility there. I asked Susan to check with Tom Slayton and confirm that those replacement restricted funds are truly replacement restricted funds. And I had sent some legal documentation to all of you, which I tried to summarize here, and the answer was something like, maybe if, but. And, and Susan, even in talking with Tom Slayton more, it might even get into, okay, you gotta do it, but only for assets that were in place prior to 2003, as an example. So that would even create a bunch of work for CCMC, which they're not doing today. I don't like any of those answers. Past boards, first of all, I want to be clear here, have fully funded the reserve, so this is not an issue of past performance at all. To me, this is a matter of good governance going forward. I think it is proper for us to say as our fiduciary responsibility for managing the assets that the replacement reserves should be fully funded in compliance with the engineering studies that we have every 3 years as required by law. I would like to recommend that we ask Susan and or Steve to work with Tom Slayton to give us language or an approach so that we can just finalize this, and when we say these are restricted, they truly are. Because if you read through what Tom said, he thinks they might be, but this has not been legislated anywhere, and someone could make an argument that they're not. I don't want to end up in a situation where somebody says, you know what, we'll take $500,000 or $600,000 out of that fund, and we'll use it over here, and yes, we're going to pay it back, don't worry about it, and that becomes an issue for the town. So the real genesis for this is, I think, it would be good practice for us to ask the two of them to work with Tom Slayton or whoever else might want to be involved so that we can say those truly are restricted funds. We protected them with the law as it exists in 2018.
Kevin, would you recommend, Brian and Steve, that this be a charter change? I mean, it seems like it needs to go at that level so that it's got binding authority going forward.
Yeah, I believe that this is a charter change, and we have a list of charter change suggestions that have been made throughout the years. 2009 was the last time you did a charter change in the community. We talked about, through prior boards, doing a charter review and change every 10 years, which would put you on track of doing a charter change next year, 2019. And the reason why I say next year, it's the 10 years, but you also have done your strategic plan for this year. We could certainly add that as a strategic planning item for this year, or we could stick to the 10 years, knowing that it's not charter protected, but it is operating that way under that protection.
So the board could, for example, make a motion and approve that we would hold those funds as segregated pending the charter change to come potentially
Right.
in a
And the
year.
charter change is going to require a vote of the community,
Right.
which is why
Right.
it's a bigger project. Right, and you might want to, I know in the past, they put a task force together to review the documents, so there might be other areas that we don't have identified here on this list that you want to change now. I mean, get your money's worth all at the same time when you do your charter changes.
Concerns?
I would be perfectly happy with this being part of a charter change project next year. I just think it would be wise to do it.
And is there any danger of any third party attaching to that reserve fund as it's presently structured?
I think that the only way you're going to lose those dollars is if you decide to spend them somewhere other than where you're supposed to.
So we're our own worst enemy in that regard, is that right?
The control is this board as it exists
Mhm.
today. You could have somebody in the community argue that those aren't restricted. We have good, solid financial funding. We're not, so I think, in the future, if we talk about a community center or whatever thing we want to do in that like that, let's just, as part of a charter change, protect these assets for good governance, and the rest of it, we're doing all the right things. I just want to, charter change is perfect.
Right, and any reserve fund expenditures, whether they're the protected or the capital improvement, they all require your vote. So management wouldn't just spend those funds without bringing them back to you for a vote.
Right.
We'll keep that on our growing list of charter items.
Yeah,
So
thanks,
when we-
Brian. I
so when
really
we talk about
appreciate.
priorities for
Yeah.
next year, charter
19.
change is going to be one of
That
them.
needs to be on
The
there.
list when we talked about, I think, was the June board meeting here.
Right. Yeah, and it probably makes sense as we get closer to the end of the year, start identifying if you want to put together a task force, what members of the community you'd like to be involved in that, to go through a thorough review. And it will include your attorney also, legal counsel.
All right, we're doing really well, actually. David, right now. All right, Comcast updates is our next topic. This is something that was put on a sub-association or an association within the community. Had some concerns or questions regarding the agreement that CROA put in place with Comcast, and leaving out is, I believe, the best way to say the feelings. Jackson's coming out with this one. Other associations on that decision. So this, yeah.
Let me, because I was the person that asked that this, one of the people that asked that this get added. Because four of us were not present when this happened, I mean, Debbie and Jack obviously have a history with this, and you can enlighten us, I think, as well as Steve. But obviously there has been some fallout from the decision to make Comcast the preferred provider, and the contracts and agreements, the consultants that were hired, and then the impact, not just on single-family homes, but on the apartments or the condo associations. And the lack of clarity, I guess, that some people in the community still have about what that circumstance was. And then what we could or should do going forward, if anything. So what I wanted to do was to just ask Steve to tell us, for our own edification, I'm sorry that this is going to be old history for some of you, but I think for me at least, I would like to know what happened, what that contract was about, why, how we got to where we are right now, and your recommendations as management about where we go forward. Is that?
Good. I'm going to tell you a story, then I'm going to take you back to around 2012. The Celebration as a community was presented with a business problem. Your business problem was that the only lines that you had within the community were I may get the technical terms wrong, so I apologize if I do, but I believe that they were called copper lines or the smart city lines that were in the community. Older technology for lines. It doesn't carry as much data as you need your lines to. Cable has changed so much throughout the years now where people consume hundreds of thousands of hours worth of data and information. So you have on demand, you have sports packages, you have DVRs recording, and all of that technology could not be supported on those old lines. That was smart cities lines. Comcast was the only cable provider in this community, and they were releasing those old lines from Smart City. Smart City decided to put in new fiber lines, bigger pipe, bigger conduit, more data can rush through it. Comcast and Smart City did not reach an agreement to run cable on those new lines. Smart City does not offer cable. They offer telephone, they offer internet. They do not offer cable services. I believe they now have something that's more of like a Sling TV type package deal, but it's not cable in the traditional sense of cable. So this community hired a technology advisor to go out and do an RFP to find a cable provider that would come in and put in their own lines. Multiple cable providers wanted to do a bulk rate with the community, meaning the CROA board would pay for cable services for the community and it would be part of your assessment. So there were board members that were adamant, and I believe the final decision of the board was we do not want an agreement where we have to enter into a bulk agreement for this community. So Comcast ended up being the only group that came back to say we are willing to put our lines into the community. Now we have to understand that Comcast did not need an agreement with CROA to do this because Smart City did not have an agreement with CROA to put in their fiber lines. All they need to do is go through the development district to utilize the utility easements that are there for them. And the development district has very little control over that also because they're regulated by federal regulations to have to allow these companies to utilize the easements. So the agreement that the CROA board reached was an agreement to work with Comcast as a kind of a support to say if you're going to take all those capital dollars and invest in our community for fiber lines, then we'll support you, but we're asking you to do a couple things back in support of us. So one of those was restore the grass back to its existing condition. Work with the CDD and CROA and management to make sure the boxes are placed in the best locations that we could. And we were going to get and give exclusive marketing when it comes to cable to Comcast. So we wouldn't market for other cable providers in the community. Wouldn't make a lot of sense anyways because you can't buy AT&T, Uverse, or other cable providers in the community. So in agreement for that, CROA would receive some courtesy services, internet at multiple locations, Wi-Fi hotspots at multiple locations, and some cable also at 3 locations, I believe. So that was in exchange for working together to bring these lines in. Now, the agreement was always to put the fiber network throughout the community, through the easements. And when the conversation came up about the apartments, what do you do with the apartments? We reached out to every, not apartments, I'm sorry, condos. We reached out to every condo association and said, when Comcast puts their lines in, would you be interested in working with Comcast directly to come up with a deal for your association, for your condo association? And we had a few that came back to us and said, yes, we'd like to talk to them. But Comcast committed then to make sure that their lines run by the apartment complex, meaning if you buy their service, then they can connect you to it. So they're not going to skip you. They'll run them close proximity to the association, and then you can connect. When it comes to agreements, though, with Comcast for single-family homeowners or for condo associations, CROA has nothing to do with those agreements at all, other than the contract says that they'll put fiber all the way to the home or all the way to the apartment. They won't go fiber in the ground and then the coaxial or the copper or whatever that line is to the apartment. So essentially, if you all as homeowners wanted to work with Comcast to buy your package, it's up to you to do that. You would communicate with them on how big of an Xfinity package you want, how big of an internet package you want, those types of things. The same concept applies to the condo associations. and it's probably more important for the condo associations because some of them already have bulk agreements with either DirecTV or with Comcast. So those agreements, you really don't have the authority or the control over whether or not the condo association meets its end of the agreement. So essentially, if CROA was to get involved in an agreement with a condo association, you're putting yourself at a little bit of risk because you have no control. You can't make them do something that they're supposed to do as part of their agreement. So does that answer it?
Well, can I ask a couple of follow-up questions?
Please.
Just based on some of the comments that I've seen, was there some negotiation on behalf of individual homeowners that was done by CROA with respect to Comcast?
Not that I know of, no.
Okay. So were the residents, let's say, living in Mirasol, who are CROA members, treated any differently than, say, someone who had a single-family home in Main Village?
No. Mirasol would be on their own to discuss and negotiate what type of agreement they have with Comcast. And I know the argument's been made that CROA would have more negotiation power because it's a bigger entity, but you're not negotiating the purchase of any packages at all for anybody. You get your courtesy services, but when it comes to the community wanting to use Comcast, it's just an option for them. They can decide that Comcast isn't where they want to go and they want to continue to have a satellite. But satellites all over the community, you would probably all agree, could become an eyesore very quickly. So having a in-ground cable option for this community made sense. It was the only in-ground cable option, and it continues to be the only in-ground cable option that this community has.
So when we did our drive around, we saw certain sections, areas that have satellite.
And they're in mediation agreements to have them moved.
So you mentioned that the condo association, there's a reach out to see if they would like to participate, whatever the case was. The one question I have with that, was that cable ran by every condo association, every complex, if you will, for the ability for them to connect to right outside?
Yes, that is my understanding, that every condo association has that. Now, Mirasol is not complaining that they don't have access to it. Their issue is the service and the package, and the bulk agreement, I believe, because I think, if I understand it correctly, Comcast is coming back to them and saying, we want you to do a bulk agreement. And they're saying, we don't want to do a bulk agreement.
So Comcast is saying to a condo association, we want a bulk agreement with you.
Right.
And that bulk agreement would be different than the agreement they'd have with an individual homeowner, is that correct?
Well, a bulk agreement means that everybody would have the service paid for. So they get all the units, and they would say, everybody has this now. It becomes part of your assessment. Right now, as an individual homeowner, it's not part of your assessment. You can choose to
Buy it or not.
Buy it or don't buy it.
So Comcast came to CROA with first rounds, trying to get every single family or every property to be.
Right.
All the other ones.
Yeah, I think Comcast was the one that said, we'll put the capital investment, because remember, when they drop their fiber lines in, they're paying they're betting on themselves, essentially. They're saying, we'll go and get the services. We'll sell enough to the community.
The complaint that we're getting from Mirasol, is the package inadequate, or is it too much? Where's the complaint?
Well, I think what you're being asked is, why weren't the condo association represented? And would you be willing to do something to make sure you represent the condo associations? But my argument back is that this agreement falls short of any negotiation at all with Comcast to provide service to anybody's home or condo association.
I've spoken with Mirasol residents, and some of them, they just don't want it. They don't want the service. They don't want to pay extra for this service. So, you know, that's where some of the battle's coming in. Some want it and some don't, but if Comcast only wants to do a bulk agreement, then everybody's going to be assessed.
Right.
So, in the best interest, Mirasol would like what everybody else in Celebration does have, which is a contract that's between Comcast and association.
But I don't know if that's...
What can we as CROA do?
I don't know if that's an accurate statement, though, when it comes to condo associations. I don't know that every condo association has the ability to buy for individual condo owners.
So you can't wire to individual units is the problem,
It's up
right?
to, it's between
that-
the association and Comcast to determine what that agreement looks like. Because if they're gonna come in and put the fiber into the condo association,
Yeah.
they're gonna do a return on investment. They're either gonna say, okay, we think we can sell enough, or it doesn't make sense for us to do it unless we get a bulk agreement. Now, all service areas, all individual townhome owners and all single-family homeowners have a fiber line running by their house. If they want a package, if they want to enter a contract with Comcast, then they'll drop the line all the way up to the house. But they have to enter into that agreement, that contract, for that to happen.
Could I just ask Debbie or Jack, since you were part of this process?
Actually,
It was before? It even goes back?
It was 15.
Oh,
2015.
okay.
Well, now we voted on it, yeah.
Was there a discussion about Comcast versus some other companies at that point?
Nobody else stepped up to the.
So they were the only option, right?
The only option.
And did the condo association say we want something other than Comcast at that point, to your recollection?
It doesn't matter of saying.
I mean,
once
there
we
was
all-
no-
Nobody else came, we looked at, was Century and a couple other places, and they just refused to even look at us.
Yeah, I think part of the challenge here is, I think, we're trying to figure out after the fact why it is that some of the condo associations are unhappy about this. And it seems pretty clear cut from what Steve's saying. And I don't really understand what the objection is, except that some of the condos don't like Comcast, but I don't know what the alternative is, other than a satellite dish or something
The
else.
alternative is satellite dish or streaming.
Am I missing something here?
No, I think that's the best way to wrap it up. I mean, again, if there's a solution that I'm not smart enough to think of, I'd love to hear it. I just don't know what that would be. I mean, I would advise CROA against getting involved in negotiations with single-family homeowners or condo associations on behalf of them to buy their cable service.
Yeah.
Gary Hudspeth, 1471 Resolute, and I'm looking at the big picture, like Jack was trying to explain. Celebration is no different from any other community in the United States. If you've lived anywhere else in the United States, you know that your choices are limited. There are a few communities in the United States that actually have multiple television connectivity, cable access, something other than satellite. But those are very few. Most of the cable companies have structured their infrastructure to supply a service to this community, but not to that community that's right next door. And they do that on purpose so they all can get a little bit of the piece of pie. There are very few communities that have multiple access choices.
See, I just wondered, the packages that are being offered, I mean, I can understand you buying a bulk thing, but are there levels in that bulk?
I'm not sure. I haven't seen
I
it.
mean, some people could be satisfied with the very basic service versus other people are gonna want the high-end, all the premium channels and all the other stuff. I'm sure they've gotta be offered.
I have not seen the offer that was presented to Marisol. And I know that Comcast has always had a reputation for poor customer service, but I've had Spectrum, I've had Bright House, I've had AT&T Uverse, I've had DirecTV, and I've had Comcast throughout my life, and they're all terrible at customer service. I don't know any of them that are great at customer service.
So to tie into the email that brought this conversation up, and this is not the first one that came through that the entire board had, but it was something that came in March. Rick, he is the president of Marisol. He mentions that he spoke with other condo associations as well, and he's saying 756 owners are represented by, I believe, those 3 altogether. How do we communicate better, and this may be what you brought up earlier, that we'll discuss next month, how to stop this from happening again? Whether it's something that we as CROA can do or cannot do, we can get them involved in the process from the beginning. What are our options now? It seems limited.
Yeah, so the first question, to stop this from happening again, the lines are in the ground, and I don't know that you're ever gonna put an RFP out to find another cable provider.
Well, not cable specifically, but
Right.
in general, any
Right.
improvements, anything that happens that could affect any owner in the
Right.
community, let's get every association involved.
Well, if I could speak to the item a little bit out of order here that I'd like to put up for further discussion later, is simply that we should consider the possibility of an advisory group made up of one representative from every condo association in Celebration that we could ask or to weigh in on issues like this, so that there's some level of accountability and connectivity, not to use the Comcast word, but that we know what we're hearing from the condo associations as a group, and we're able to communicate back that way. I don't think it would, I think it's no skin off our nose to do that at all. And I think it might help improve that relationship, and certainly reflects the fact that we know that the people living in the condos are CROA members. I don't think we're treating them as second-class citizens. I don't get any sense of that at all. You know, and I'm not sure what this board can do beyond that.
Well, even if we go back in the past, and you're the board that has this contract in front of you, you didn't have to approve it for Comcast to put their fiber lines in. They never had to go through CROA at all to do it. They just needed to get their CDD easement agreements. And CDD can't deny them, because there was some conversation about CDD doing that when water lines were hit, and they can't.
I think our real purpose in this is just trying to make sure the community was restored back to the original state.
Right.
And in signing that agreement, they gave us a couple things like some hotspots.
Mm-hmm.
And we offered to promote them, that's it.
Right. And they gave you a cable service provider in this community, because they were no longer going to be operating off of smart city lines.
So it's
That
just-
agreement was
it's
ending.
just a tag on that was help us out with it, and really not a commercial agreement to purchase anything.
Should they provide everything?
We're still working through some construction for hotspots. We don't have all of our hotspots yet.
How many of the associations have voiced concern about this other than Marisol?
The only one that I've received is from the one that you all received. And I know that
Okay.
there's some comments in there that there's some other ones that they've spoke with, but I haven't heard from them.
Okay.
Can I answer, is there a group of people that are not receiving Comcast? Are they the majority, or?
Not that I know of. That, like I said, I've only heard from one representative from
Well, my understanding is
Marisol.
that Marisol, for example, doesn't have Comcast. Right.
And it seems as though at least two other associations do not either.
Well,
Okay.
Georgetown's admitted that they didn't want to do it.
Right.
They talked to them, and then they decided as a board they didn't want to do it.
Right.
So who does Georgetown have? They just have all direct?
They have
DirecTV.
dishes, yeah.
Which is why I think we saw the satellite dishes, right?
Right.
So, we paid a consultant, is that correct?
We did, to help identify providers through the RFP.
And the consultant was independent, they didn't work with Comcast?
No, no.
They were not,
Right.
they were not related in any way to any provider?
No. No.
Okay.
There are certain other things we've discussed in the last few months where
Yes.
we educate ourselves, we find out we have no control, and I think the best that we can do is be honest with somebody and just say, we have no control on this one. I mean, when I hear about this one, it's not even like we made a decision that started the wheels. We just tried to protect the community on aesthetic points.
Yeah, if you tell them that the contract's no good, that they breached the contract, because they did put flyers up on doors, they put door hangers up, which was a breach of contract. But if you were to end the contract, you just don't get your hotspots. I mean, you're not stopping a payment to them for anything, because you're not buying anything from them.
My question, CROA hired a consultant. Every member of CROA paid for this consultant, they shipped it. Is that what I'm understanding?
It was part of the operating expenses, correct?
So just devil's advocate here, part of CROA would then be condo associations. Did this consultant give feedback on the relationship with the condos?
Yeah, and I think that they did, but there was multiple conversations about that, but the conversation always comes down to the fact that you all cannot enter into an agreement for an individual condo association. They have that negotiation power and that power of the pen to sign a contract with Comcast.
No, I understand that. Is there a report that came from this consultant?
No, not a report. It was to build the scope of the RFP and then to work on the contract also.
May I just make one comment? I think one of the challenges, I think the condo advisory board or the task force or, you know, some kind of communication tool between the condominiums is a great idea. And that's something that for the last couple of years we've been trying to find a way to get them engaged with us. But I think that if you talk about service areas, if you talk about single-family homes, the owner owns the lot, they own everything, so they can give them permission to get to that particular, you know, box, whatever it is.
The last mile.
Condominiums are different because the condominium association owns the structure, owns all the wires in the walls and all that stuff, you know, as opposed to the owner owns from the drywall in. So I think the challenge that condominiums have, you know, and the bulk deal thing that they're talking about is a challenge that probably most condominiums have, because in order for owner A to be able to get the cable to their unit, it would have to come through condo property, it'd have to go up through the condo walls, and it'd have to get to their unit. And I don't know that, any contractor would want to do that with just one owner, or even 50% of the owners.
I think
Yeah.
the last question I've got on this is, why now? Why has this become an issue now? This agreement was written a long time ago. It's been in place. I mean, what am I missing that happened over the last year or 6 months that's made this a hot button now?
My biggest issues that I dealt with the Comcast contract were just chasing them around to put the grass back the way it was supposed to be.
Yeah.
And put a bush where it needed to go to shield a box. That was my big issue. Never have I dealt with anything that has to do with negotiations with an association.
Mirasol has half the people who want A and half the people want B, and they're trying to figure out what to do.
Let me go back a little bit further. That I think part of the problem was that Comcast say they're going to shut down the service for the regular basic service, and then everybody after that had to have Xfinity.
Everybody had to buy, or had to go off of the line. So it was January of this year, I believe, was when they were not going to be on the lines.
The problem was that it was a cable, a copper line going up there at that point, and they say, we're done with copper, so you're either going to go Xfinity or not, and that's where it stopped.
Okay. And so that's what started the
That's a good
new discussion,
possibility.
because that 50% that Brian's talking about that wanted cable then couldn't get it. Is that?
Right. I mean, we're not privy to the conversations of the Mirasol board, but they may be talking about the unsightly dishes if they were to go that route. And, you know, they're probably in negotiation with Comcast, and they're looking for some backing power for those negotiations.
Can we give them any?
I don't know what you could do. You cannot enter an agreement from them. You have no leverage over Comcast at this point that you could utilize. There's no soft power that I know of that.
So Steve, you sent, and you forwarded this out to the entire board when this conversation came up, March 3rd, 2015, you sent a letter out to all the associations. And you mentioned in there, by signing this letter, you're requesting that Comcast deliver its networking services to a mutually agreed location at the properties and enter discussions with Comcast to the provisioning of services to individual units. Did you receive this back?
I did, and I forwarded those to you all, the ones that actually responded. And I think it was 4 or 5 of them, and I don't remember exactly which ones they were.
There's Georgetown, Carlisle, Sienna, and Springbrook Terrace.
In the town center condos, I believe.
Okay, and we have, yeah.
And Mirasol was not one of
So
those.
we have confirmation that it was delivered to.
Well, that just meant that they would put the cable, right, and that then would then negotiate with Comcast to provide their services individually.
That CROA could have done.
Right,
Okay.
right,
So the door was open.
right.
Okay.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, and if there's another solution that, again, that I'm not thinking of or none of you all have thought of, then please have those shared with me and see, we can at least explore the opportunity and see. I just don't know what that would be.
And just to be clear and on the record, I've heard from Rick Nelson during today's meeting. He's tried to get in. We weren't streaming. He's tried to call in. He's unable to do that. The Mirasol board is meeting this afternoon. I'm not sure what they're talking about. He's asked that we update him on this meeting. I'm glad to make that phone call. If you would prefer, if the board would prefer that somebody else do it or that Steve do it, I'm glad to do that. But I do think we should respond back to him since he tried to participate in
And
the
on
meeting.
that note, that's what I was about to say, is he did want to be here tonight, he is unavailable.
Right.
From a previous.
Steve, can you make that some?
Certainly can call him back, yes.
We can have Steve make that call. I think he's got the background
Yeah.
that we don't have.
Great.
All right, we have about 20 minutes, and we have 2 items mainly. Community Events Task Force final report.
I was assigned to that task force, and Steve was also their participant. And Steve, you just want to give a background. This is the final proposal from the task force, and based on this, I would recommend that we sunset this task force, and anything that comes up in the future based on this information, we could work on in a workshop setting.
The only thing I would add to that is that this community event plan utilized these different entities that had some expertise in running events and that had resources for events. It utilized their expertise to put together a series of best practices for running events. This is not an implementation plan. This is just, if you're going to do events, they should be run at this level in town. I don't believe at this point in time that this board has the authority to make other entities use this plan. You certainly have the authority to say, CROA, or CCMC, if you're running an event, it should run by these best practices. But we don't have the authority right now to enforce other entities in town to do these. So it is a list of best practices for how events should be run. Our next phase to this conversation needs to be, how do we get all the different governing entities together to get some collaboration on actually utilizing these best practices moving forward?
Yeah, this is rather limited if you read it, because we had two groups that just didn't attend. Those were the ones that really had most of the authority to deal with this. So we dealt with what we could. We had fire there, we had police there, we had a representative from the community, Steve, myself, and this is all we could really come up with without participation from CDD and Lexington. So this is, we did what we could.
Is CDD and Lexington aware of the final report they have?
I don't know yet. This is just.
They had the draft that didn't have the graphics on it yet, but I will send it out to everybody that was on that committee again, or that task force again, and it included Lex, and it included CDD members. So
I'm sorry, and the county was there as well, Dave Tomac.
Does it include CANOA?
I'm the representative from CANOA, but I can certainly copy.
Well, I think it would be helpful, since the
Thanks.
CANOA members that we saw the other night didn't know that we do fireworks. I think it would be helpful if they were up to speed on this.
But these are just general guidelines, and I mean, this, as far as having authority to implement some of this, we just don't have it. CROA doesn't have it. Most of this is dealing with town center, some of the traffic. We talked to the county about traffic control, the sheriff's department with traffic control. We talked about fire safety for events, and this is our report.
Is it your sense that that this is about the money involved for Lexington? In other words, I read these plans and they look terrific to me. I mean, I was like, dude, we could do this. This is great. But they're expensive because we're putting in lots of additional police and the shuttles and so on. At the end of the day, is this a question of authority and money, or is it something else? I mean,
Maybe a different way to ask that question is,
please.
would it be possible for us to have somebody on this board who would almost act as a liaison with Lexington to try to start communication?
Yes, that's exactly what I was saying.
To have no communication
Yeah.
just doesn't seem intelligent. So
Yeah.
is there a safe person on this board who could meet with Mike Nunez and other people and have conversations about, okay, we've done this, I mean, maybe it can be Bond, I don't know. We've done this, let's talk about October, let's talk about now snowing, stuff like that, where might they participate, how might we coordinate in a way that makes sense, and, if we need to bring in a safe person from CDD, maybe we can do that, but can we rebuild communication?
I think so. I'd like to point out that both Vaughn and I are on the community events task force, or that's our objective this coming year, so let's run with it.
I would love that. I think,
I would too.
just like I did with Artisan Park, and how when you get just, sometimes smaller is better, and it would be, I think it'd be great.
And we're not flying, I mean, and to be clear, we're not trying to be non-transparent about this. I mean, I think we're being very transparent about all of these steps, just as we've been with the county and everything else. I mean, we clearly have a problem in dealing with Lexington and Town Center. But I'm not sure the problem's gonna get solved at this level as well as it would be solved by putting you guys in a room and getting it out of the, where we've been, right or wrong, we just need to change the narrative right now. And if we can change the narrative and start using this as a plan, then we can bring it back to CROA, right, and the other entities. And so I would really endorse that idea.
I think it benefits the entire community if, as we're planning large events, whether it's a CROA large event or whether it's a Lexington large event, that the entities, Osceola County, CROA, Town Center, or I'm sorry, Osceola County Fire Department, Sheriff's Department, and CDD be part of a sit down together to talk about, and I think it helps Lexington understand that here's the resources that we'll pay for, here's the resources that are available from other entities within the community. How can it be a collaborative effort now instead of it just being a, hey, you have to do it this way?
Since we never meant to put any more fees or anything on that side, it was just more so collaborative efforts that we can do. Are you able to?
Yes, Jack and I are both on that. We'll work to get together with Lexington and CDD on this. We've tapped out as far as CROA goes. We're tapped out on this. We've met numerous times and we've done what we can. So the only way to move forward is to bring the other two parties in and get everybody together, make sure we're all on the same page and get some kind of a general agreement in place.
And let me just say, for the purposes of the public, the email that I sent to the board, I did have an introductory conversation because I had not met Mike Nunez previously. And it's my impression that he's at least open to having a new set of conversations. I don't know how fruitful they'll be, candidly, but I do think there's the opportunity, the door is open, and if we can try and move through that door, it's worthwhile. So.
Well, you never know until you try it, just like the community center down with the county. You just don't know until you.
And Vaughn is the miracle worker.
Well, I do love this plan. It's a great thing that you guys got together, and it's a good thing for when the time is right. There's a guideline that's there.
Yeah.
That's good. Following up to the covenant violations follow process and remediation.
Back Tony up.
Yep.
What is this issue?
Something I can read up there.
She'll give you a recap. It would be on the video, so I think we'll just have the conversation. Don't you have, everybody should have a copy of it that we sent out last Friday, so. Can we just do it without address or names?
And
Okay.
items?
Yep.
Okay, so I sent a history last week. If you saw, it's about 2 pages from when it started in 2012, how it went away, how it came back, and how it's still there, and the whole processes that they went through. I'm not listing items or anything or what it is, because it'll make it too obvious. But the items are still on the property, so we're requesting mediation at this point.
Well, I think if you need clarification on the items, we can certainly talk about the items here. That's okay. We just don't want to name the name or the address out loud. And this is the awnings that were placed on the home.
We got it.
And again, through the appeal process, to have them capped, that was denied.
Twice.
So at this point, you're either going to choose to continue to allow them to be up in the community or to go to the next level, and the next level is mediation.
And there has been an assessment, is that correct?
$5,000.
So is there a lien against the property?
No, we don't do liens on fines.
So it would only be at the estoppel letter level that this would come into play. So if the owner attempted to transfer the property, at that point it would have to be paid.
The fines would be transferable,
Pay
yes.
the fine?
No.
No. So am I right, it just sits out there until the point that there's a property transfer attempted?
Right, but the key issue here, though, is that the awnings stay on the house, too.
Yeah, no, I got that.
Right.
I'm just trying to figure out where the money.
Oh, yeah, the money stays on the account, and it's transferable.
Okay.
And we could even convert them to specific assessments, which
They
they've
have
already
been,
been
right.
done. It's questionable about whether or not we can put a lien on a house based off of fines, even when they're converted, because of language in your charter. So again, maybe something you want to look at when you do your charter update in 2019.
But up to this point, we have not leaned against a specific property for an assessment.
That's correct.
For fines.
I think we should continue to proceed, though. I mean, otherwise, it's this one now, but it'll be something else the next time.
Yeah.
I think,
Yeah.
you know.
Is that a motion?
What, you got a tea time?
Whatever you said is fine.
Well, the motion would be to pursue mediation then on this property.
I make a motion.
I would second.
All in favor?
In
Aye.
discussion, is there any more discussion? Are we done discussing?
Discussion?
And I would like, to Tony, while you're still here, I would like to know if dinosaurs holding open house signs are permissive.
No, I got your email this morning. I'll reach out to the owner.
When we have, just on that point, are we still, excuse me?
No, you're good.
Okay. What's the thought of when you have all these, I've seen a lot of these lately, you know, big balloons on the porches and stuff. Have we ever in the past, when those are observed, sent a letter to the actual broker realtor and have them, and notify them and CC the owner that this is a violation and see if we can get some compliance here, because it's getting out of hand?
Usually what we do is we go to the owner, but we call the realtor and let them know, because a lot of the times realtors aren't from this town, so they aren't aware of it.
Yeah, most of our celebration realtors abide by the rules. They all know how it works here in town. A lot of times when this happens, it's out of town.
But as a
realtors.
corporate, as a corporation though, how can we, I would like to see a letter going to the realtors as well, because, I mean, it's a little more forceful. I mean, phone calls are good. I'm glad we're doing it, but I would think something in writing would.
Right.
Have
We
a
just
little
can't
bit more
find,
force.
right, we just can't, there's nothing that we can do to the realty company.
No, we can't, but I'm
But-
saying that we could say in the
Sure.
letter that, you know, you're putting the homeowner at
Yes.
risk as a violation of
Yeah,
the.
and you
of
can
our-
start
of our
fining the
covenants.
homeowners as an egregious violation every time you see
There's
it.
one house on Spring Park Loop that has balloons or banners, everything but
Is
a
that-
blimp, and they've had an open house every week for about 10 straight weeks.
Yeah.
It's time to get serious. I think.
So are
Right.
these, the for sale signs, that we have at home, they're all the same style. Where do those come from?
There is a company called Fast Signs in Kissimmee that makes them.
And how does a realtor that's not from this community know about that?
The owner, or they call us when we give them.
So part of that process, let's go ahead and tie in.
But these are open house signs that we're talking about. It's the
No,
open
no,
house
no.
stuff
My-
that's more
my
egregious.
thing is that if they are coming to us, we put a for sale sign in, that's what's required. Hey, as a heads up, you cannot have this, you
Yeah.
can do this.
I think that's stated on the application.
It
We
is.
might need to get verbal with it.
And they're also allowed to have an open house, certain size open
Correct.
house sign in the yard, but that's it.
We've also reached out in the past through articles and through Friday Flash, letting homeowners know that if they're getting ready to sell their house, they can contact us and do like a pre-inspection. We could make that part of the conversation with them too about, you know, what that standard's gonna look like for their open house.
Well, I think we need to emphasize with the realtors that are coming in, our procedures as far as having the maps and stuff like that available on the Saturdays
Yeah.
and Sundays. But also, I'd like to see park monitors as they go around. If they see open house signs that are laid out there in the CBD property,
Right.
pull them.
Yeah, we can pull the ones that are in the easements. I know I've pulled plenty of signs myself in the easements. You can't do much about the dinosaurs and the balloons though, so
No,
that's.
not on their property, but
Right.
I'm saying if they're decorating the rest of the community.
Correct, right.
You know,
Right. Well, we have our second inspector now too, so I'll talk to Tony about getting some weekend shifts to make sure that we're really looking
Yeah, I
for
mean,
those.
we're seeing in Artisan Park, we're seeing a fair number of open house signs that are getting put all over the community, in the parks, in the easements, lots of extra signage. And while it's good for my walking to go around and pick them up, it really shouldn't be my job to have to do
Starting,
that.
I think when one realtor sees somebody else doing it, then it
Yeah,
turns into a
absolutely.
circus.
Absolutely.
Well, I
Right.
would charge each of us as
Yeah.
we go around on Saturdays and Sundays to visit these homes that are for sale.
Yeah.
Tell them.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Perfect.
We have 5 minutes to spare. Would you like to,
We have the items for.
future items?
Yeah.
Yeah, what do we go on to?
Probably just add the 2 new ones that you've added today, and then we'll get with him next week when he gets back, and we'll talk about what he'd like to see for the June 4th agenda.
Yeah, if I
We'll
could
get it out
just
to everybody.
explain quickly the one item that I had. We've created and appointed people to all of these different committees now. And when these committees are meeting, I think one of the questions that they've got is how do they report either through their chair or as individual members back on questions or concerns or things that they've got, and whether or not it would make sense to appoint a member of CROA as a liaison to each committee, just as a point of contact and reference to get information to the committee and back to CROA. For example, the Special Events Committee, they're working on some things. They've got some questions. They could talk to JR, they could talk to Steve, but if they want to get to CROA specifically, there should be a board member that they can communicate with who could then bring those concerns to the board. That's what I'd like.
I just think that we need to make sure that anything that's brought before the board from any committee has to be either through the chair or the chair notifying the board
Absolutely.
that this person is speaking on behalf, because I don't want to hear from every individual committee member, because we don't know if they're speaking for the board or the chair committee or not.
Well, you all have assigned either 5 or 7, an odd number for the committees. They're supposed to vote and have one voice direction or one voice recommendation back to the CROA board. So I know that sometimes that mindset is harder to understand and to grasp, but I think that they're getting there. They're understanding a little bit more of that. I know the Recreation Committee does it. They'll vote on the items, and then whatever the decision is of the committee is what gets moved forward.
I just think it would be helpful. We've got more committees doing more things right now. It would be helpful to know what's going on, to connect with them, to be able to provide, if they're asking for direction, and I agree with Vaughn, it should come through the chairman. If they're asking for direction, I think then the board should know that they're asking for direction and we can provide that to them. I don't think this is a big thing to do. I don't think it's terribly burdensome.
Right.
I just think it's a way that we get to have that communication going on.
And I think it's helpful when you do your level of service budget meeting to talk about what the GL line items are going to look like. It helps them better understand how to build their budgets for next year also. I mean, JR will build the special events budgets. He'll get feedback and input from the committee, but you're setting the level of service and the direction that you want to look at.
I will say, we used to do that, have liaisons to each of the committees, and that ended about 3 years ago.
Okay.
But it's a great idea.
Yeah, I think so. And I have one question that goes with this really quickly, and I don't know that you can give me an answer. Are these individual committees governed under Section 720?
It's
One committee is mentioned under 720, it's covenants.
Okay.
It basically says we cannot have a relationship with the covenants.
So, for example, the Artisan Park Committee,
Right.
is that a 720 board?
I don't believe that it is at 720, but they do operate as if they're 720 because it is a committee. Again, it's not a board running the association. But they do have decision making when it comes to the financials. So that would probably be a little bit more specific Tom question.
Okay. But outside of that committee, there's no other committee other than covenants
Yeah.
that's a 720.
Right. Every other committee is appointed by you all as a board as delegation of some of your duty to come back as advice, not to be the final decision maker. And even the covenants and ARC committees both have where you are the final layer of appeal. And you're going to have the same thing happening with Dog Park Committee. Any policies that they put in place or any hearings that they have to do over violations of the dog park will ultimately be able to come back to you for appeal.
Okay. Thank you.
One final item, just if we're getting this off to David for future workshops, we can touch more on it then. We had a conversation about the CJC, either on the June 4th or June 18th.
CJC?
Yeah.
And may I add one more item? Management has been looking at smart irrigation as a way for us to be able to identify leaks and save money on our overall water. So if we could add that to the agenda, we just got some information in.
And I would like to add one item, which, whether it was June or July, we've talked about technological issues. We've talked, we had the email about phones and how that was work, we talked about streaming and stuff like that, so I'd like to put it on a workshop. And if we need to give a little more time for homework, we can make a July item, but let somebody come back and say, okay, now we've actually looked at streaming, we've looked at recording, we've looked at the phone system and everything, and this is what we need to do. And if it turns into budget items and it's a 2019 budget item, great, but at least let's acknowledge we need to get it done.
All righty, we've got 1 minute left, how we doing?
Great job, Kevin.
Wrapped up? Motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
There you go.
All in favor?
All right.
Jack, was that you?
Heard nothing.